Daniel Whitmore never walked without purpose. Every step inside his Lagos mansion usually meant a decision, a calculation, a movement toward something measurable. That night, he was on his way to his study, reviewing figures in his head, when the kitchen light caught his attention. It was late. Past the hour when staff finished cleaning. He slowed. From the hallway shadow, Daniel saw the black maid, Grace, standing alone at the kitchen counter. She wasn't eating. She wasn't rushing. She moved carefully, like someone afraid of making noise even when no one was meant to be around. She lifted a covered plate. Rice. Stew. Protein untouched. Leftover food from the dinner Daniel barely remembered eating. Grace looked once over her shoulder. Daniel froze. She slipped the food into a small nylon bag, wrapping it again inside a cloth, tying it tight with practiced fingers. Not clumsy. Not greedy. Precise. As if she had done this many times before. Daniel's first reaction surprised him. It wasn't anger. It was confusion. The food was insignificant. He wasted more than that daily without noticing. What stopped him cold was the way Grace's hands trembled as she hid it. Not the shake of fear of being caught, but the careful shake of someone handling something fragile. Something important. She exhaled slowly, closed her eyes for a brief second, and whispered something he could not hear. A name. Or a prayer. The sound hit him harder than the act itself. A memory surfaced without permission. Years ago, before wealth rewrote his life, Daniel had watched his mother do the same thing, slipping bread into her handbag after visiting neighbors who had more than they needed. His father had been sick then. Hospitals were expensive. Pride was cheaper than honesty. His mother never stole for herself. She prepared for tomorrow. Daniel hadn't thought of that in decades. Grace straightened her uniform. Grace left the kitchen without looking back. Daniel waited. He counted 10 slow seconds in his head, the way he did before signing contracts worth millions, enough time to be sure the decision was deliberate, not impulse. When the back door clicked shut behind her, he stepped forward, standing in the kitchen she had just left behind. The counter was spotless. No crumbs. No spilled stew. Only the faint warmth where the plate had been. Daniel stood there longer than necessary, staring at nothing, because his mind had begun doing something unfamiliar, connecting dots he had long trained himself to ignore. Grace was never late. Never sick. Never complained. She sent half her salary home, according to payroll, yet lived in the smallest staff quarters and never took days off. He had noticed these things before, but they had meant nothing. Now they lined up differently. He heard the gate open. Daniel moved. He followed her at a distance, staying close to the hedges lining the estate road. The security lights cast long shadows. Grace walked quickly but not nervously, the nylon bag pressed flat against her side beneath her uniform, hidden but never loosened. At the main gate, she waved off the staff boss. Daniel frowned. That was new. She turned left instead of right and started walking. Daniel hesitated. He told himself to stop. This was unnecessary. Intrusive. Yet his feet carried him forward anyway, driven by the same unease that had stopped him cold in the kitchen. Grace's walk was practiced. She avoided the main road, cut through a stretch of unfinished buildings, and crossed a narrow footpath where streetlights barely reached. Daniel stayed far enough back to avoid attention, close enough to keep her in sight. As they moved deeper into the neighborhood, the world around them shifted. The silence of the estate gave way to generator hums, distant laughter, the smell of roadside cooking oil. Daniel realized how long it had been since he had walked anywhere without a destination prepared for him. Grace stopped at a compound squeezed between a mechanic's workshop and a closed pharmacy. Paint peeled from the walls. The gate hung slightly crooked. She knocked twice. Paused. then knocked once more. Daniel slowed his breathing as a voice answered from inside. A child's voice. Thin. Tired. Mama Grace. The name landed in Daniel's chest like a weight. Grace smiled then, not the polite smile she wore at work, but something softer, something tired and real. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Daniel remained frozen where he stood. A memory flashed, himself at 7, sitting on the floor of a hospital corridor, waiting while his mother argued quietly with a nurse over unpaid bills. He remembered how hunger felt sharper when mixed with fear. He moved closer without fully deciding to. From the open window, he saw it. A small room. Bare floor. A mattress pushed against the wall. A boy sitting upright, ribs faintly visible beneath his shirt. A younger girl asleep beside a plastic bowl. Grace knelt and unwrapped the food slowly, dividing it with care, ensuring each child received an equal share. She watched them eat, her hands folded in her lap. She did not touch the food. You didn't eat again, the boy said. Grace shook her head gently. I did. She hadn't. Daniel stepped back before he was seen, his heart beating faster than it had in years. The question forming in his mind refused to stay quiet. If Grace was not stealing for herself, then how long had this been happening, and how had he never seen it? Daniel did not sleep that night. The image followed him into his bedroom, into the quiet hum of air conditioning and the soft weight of expensive sheets. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace kneeling on that bare floor, unwrapping food with the care of someone handling medicine, not leftovers. He replayed details he had missed before. The way she always packed lunch but rarely ate it. The way she asked permission to take food waste out herself. The way she flinched slightly whenever salary delays were discussed among staff, even when they never affected her directly. At dawn, Daniel stood at his window watching the estate wake up. For the first time in years, wealth felt loud. Obnoxious. Unnecessary. A flashback surfaced, sharper now. His father's funeral. Daniel was 12. After the burial, relatives filled the house. Food everywhere. Laughter too loud for grief. He remembered seeing his mother wrap meat in foil and slip it into a bag. When he asked why, she said, because someone will need it tonight. He had not asked who. That morning, Daniel arrived early at the office but accomplished nothing. Numbers blurred. Meetings passed without him hearing words. At exactly noon, he pulled up Grace's employment file on his tablet. Orphaned at 16. No listed family. Emergency contact, none. The gap spoke louder than facts. He watched the kitchen cameras later that evening, hating himself for it, yet unable to stop. Grace's movements were consistent. She never took more than what would otherwise be thrown away. She always checked twice that no one was watching. She always wrapped the food as if it mattered. Foreshadowing he could no longer deny. Daniel dismissed staff early that night. When Grace entered the study, she already looked prepared for the worst. Hands clasped. Shoulders straight. Chin lifted just enough to show dignity, not defiance. I saw you, Daniel said. She did not ask what he meant. Silence stretched between them, heavy and familiar, as if Grace had been standing in this moment for years, waiting for it to arrive. The food, he added. And where you take it? Grace nodded once. My sister died 2 years ago, she said calmly. Illness. No money for treatment. She paused. Her children had nowhere else to go. Daniel waited. He had learned long ago that real truth came only when given space. I tried selling vegetables. Cleaning offices. Night work, Grace continued. This job was the only steady thing. I could not let them starve. Why didn't you tell anyone? Daniel asked. Grace looked at him then. Really looked. Her eyes were tired, not afraid. I did not think someone like you would listen. That sentence cut deeper than accusation. Daniel leaned back slowly, absorbing the weight of his own silence over the years. He realized this was not about charity. It was about blindness. How long? He asked. Since they stopped asking why their mother didn't come home, Grace replied. Another memory struck him, himself asking his mother the same question, again and again, until she stopped answering. Daniel exhaled. You won't be fired, he said. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, relief passing over her face like a shadow lifting. But beneath it was something else, uncertainty. Experience had taught her not to trust comfort quickly. Daniel noticed. And in that moment, he understood the real question was no longer about food. It was about responsibility. Daniel did not offer help that night. Not yet. Instead, he asked questions, quiet ones, careful ones. How old were the children? Where did they sleep? Who washed them when Grace worked late? Each answer filled a space he hadn't known was empty in him. 7-year-old Ethan. 5-year-old Lily. A neighbor who checked in when she could. School stopped when fees could no longer be stretched. Daniel listened without interruption. He understood deals. He understood negotiations. This was neither. This was witnessing. Later, alone in his study, he stared at the city lights through floor-to-ceiling glass. He had donated millions. Sponsored galas. Put his name on buildings. Yet this small, unseen struggle had unfolded under his roof for years. Foreshadowing struck again. He remembered rejecting a proposal once, affordable staff housing near the estate. Too much maintenance, advisors had said. Too much risk. He had agreed without thought. The next morning, Daniel drove himself. No driver. No convoy. He returned to the narrow compound Grace had led him to, this time in daylight. The place looked smaller under the sun. Ethan answered the door. He stood protectively in front of Lily, who peeked out from behind him. Daniel knelt to their level. I know your aunt, he said. Ethan studied him carefully. She works too much. Daniel nodded. She does. Inside, Daniel saw what nights had hidden. Empty shelves. One cooking pot. School books folded away like relics. He noticed how Grace had taught the children to keep things tidy despite having little. Another flashback. His childhood bedroom, stripped bare after his father's debts were exposed. How his mother had insisted he keep his school books neat anyway. Order keeps you human, she used to say. Daniel made a decision there, in that room, but he said nothing. Change came quietly. A guest house on the estate was prepared, listed as renovation overflow. Grace was informed it was temporary. No grand speeches. No gratitude demanded. School fees were paid directly to the institution. Uniforms delivered without names attached. Food supplies stocked anonymously. Grace noticed, of course. One evening, she found Daniel in the kitchen, watching staff pack leftovers into labeled containers. This was your idea, she said softly. Yes, he replied. She hesitated. Why? Daniel thought of his mother. Of the way she hid bread. Of the way she never explained herself. Because food should not be wasted, he said. Grace understood what he did not say. That night, for the first time, Daniel heard laughter from the guest house. Children's laughter. It drifted across the estate like a sound he had forgotten existed there. And for the first time in years, Daniel did not feel like he was alone in a house built for too many. Yet the story was not finished. Because generosity, he would soon learn, does not erase wounds, it exposes them. The change in the house was subtle, but Daniel felt it everywhere. Grace arrived earlier now, not because she was asked to, but because she slept better. The tightness in her shoulders eased. She smiled more, though the smile still carried caution, like someone waiting for good things to be taken back. Ethan and Lily settled into the guest house quickly. Too quickly. That was what troubled Daniel. Children who had known stability did not unpack with such speed. They did not claim corners and routines without hesitation. These children moved like guests who had learned not to leave traces. Daniel noticed Ethan flinch when doors closed loudly. He noticed Lily's habit of counting steps, spoons, bites of food. At dinner one evening, Lily slipped a piece of meat into her pocket when she thought no one was watching. Daniel pretended not to see it. But later, alone, the image pressed on him. A memory surfaced, himself hiding coins under his mattress as a child, convinced money could disappear if left in the open. Poverty trained children in silence. Fear taught them efficiency. Daniel began spending more time around the guest house under harmless excuses. Checking renovations. Inspecting plumbing. He watched how Ethan positioned himself between adults and Lily. How Lily reached for Grace's hand even when nothing was wrong. Foreshadowing sharpened. One afternoon, Daniel overheard Ethan whisper to Lily, "Don't eat everything. We don't know tomorrow." The words struck harder than any accusation could have. That evening, Daniel invited Grace into the study again. She sat, wary but calmer than before. "They are good children," she said quickly, as if defending them against an unspoken charge. "I know," Daniel replied. "That's why I'm worried." Grace's hands tightened in her lap. Daniel leaned forward. "What happened before your sister died?" Grace did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried weight he understood instinctively. "She was sick for a long time," Grace said. "We sold everything. Furniture. Jewelry. Even food portions." The children learned early not to ask. A flashback poured out of her in fragments, nights in overcrowded clinics, doctors shaking their heads, Lily crying quietly because crying loudly wasted energy. Ethan counting bread slices and insisting Lily eat first. Daniel listened, unmoving. "She died believing she had failed them," Grace finished. "I promised her they would never sleep hungry again." Daniel realized then that the food in his kitchen had never been about hunger alone. It had been about a vow. The next day, Daniel took a step further than generosity. He met with a child therapist under the guise of a corporate charity partnership. He asked questions about children who learned scarcity too young. About fear that lingered even when safety arrived. That night, he stood outside the guest house, listening to Ethan read aloud to Lily. His voice faltered on difficult words, but he did not stop. Daniel understood something important then. If he treated this like charity, it would fade. If he treated it like responsibility, it could heal. The decision settled quietly inside him. And with it came a realization he could no longer avoid. Helping them meant changing more than their lives. It meant changing his own. Weeks passed, and Daniel's mansion began to breathe differently. Grace moved with less tension. She still woke before sunrise, still completed her duties with care, but the stiffness that had defined her presence softened. She smiled at Daniel now without caution, and he noticed the difference. She no longer measured her movement as though every gesture might be punished by scarcity or judgment. The children thrived. Ethan grew bolder, speaking up during dinner, asking questions, even correcting minor mistakes he observed in the staff. Lily's laughter rang more freely. She no longer counted each morsel but reached for food confidently, trusting the care surrounding her. The mansion, a structure that had once felt cold and lifeless, hummed with human warmth. One evening, Daniel walked into the kitchen quietly. The staff were cleaning, preparing leftovers for distribution, not disposal. Grace caught his eye, and they exchanged a subtle nod, no words necessary. The routine had become understood. Daniel paused, reflecting on the journey. He remembered the first night he saw her hiding leftovers. The hesitation in his chest. The shock at realizing that what he had dismissed as minor theft carried the weight of survival, loyalty, and a vow. That moment had shifted something fundamental in him. Not in wealth, not in power, but in heart. Flashbacks danced through him, his mother hiding bread during his father's illness, his childhood in silent fear of poverty, Grace's soft whisper at the children's doorstep, and the unyielding commitment in her eyes. He saw the interconnectedness of these moments, the chain of compassion, secrecy, and courage that had led him here. The billionaire had never truly understood what money could not fix until he saw life beyond his estate walls, a life shaped by resilience rather than privilege. Later that night, Daniel walked to the guest house and listened at the window. Ethan read stories to Lily under the dim glow of a single lamp. Grace tucked Lily in, kissed her forehead softly, and whispered something inaudible. Daniel allowed himself a rare smile. The mansion, full of wealth and luxury, had finally discovered its human soul. He returned to his study, but he did not sit. He stood and looked over the city lights, thinking of the small acts that carry weight, a hand extended, a meal hidden and given, trust granted and returned. The billionaire realized his empire was not measured in buildings or money alone but in lives touched, unseen and unrecorded. In the following weeks, Daniel began quietly integrating changes across his estate, leftover food carefully repurposed, staff supported in ways they never asked for, children of employees considered as part of his extended family. Each decision was a ripple, born from the moment he saw Grace, the black maid, hiding leftover food in his kitchen, not for herself, but for those who depended on her. And in the quiet moment of dawn, as sunlight poured into the mansion kitchen, he caught glimpses of her moving with dignity and purpose, and the children playing freely without fear. The billionaire understood at last, some lessons come not from wealth, but from witnessing courage and care in the smallest acts. He had everything, yet it was that small act of hidden leftovers that had finally taught him the weight of empathy, responsibility, and humanity.